Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to the Tang Dynasty, where fashion wasn't just flair, it was law. Picture this, it's just before dawn, and you've been jostled awake by the bumpiest ox cart in East Asia. Your bones ache, your brain's fuzzy, and your sandals are more dust than leather. Ahead, the skyline of Chang'an rises like a scroll unfurling. Pagodas, palace towers, and 1,000 fluttering banners, all swaying in the breeze like they're judging your outfit. You've been summoned. For what, you're not sure. All you were told was to show up to the Bureau of Rights at the southern gate of the imperial capital. You're just a middling clerk from Luoyang, but something in your last report must have caught someone's eye. Or maybe it was a mistake. You've packed a change of robes, a block of ink, and your best brush, just in case this is one of those promotions that turns into exile. So before you get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gates creak open as you approach, and already you sense it. This isn't just about scrolls or stamps. No, every eye is on what's above your eyebrows. On the guards, square-topped caps with embroidered badges. On the scribes, modest soft-wrapped kerchiefs. On the man barking orders near the horse stables? He's got a wide-winged lacquered black hat with side flaps like a bird mid-flight. The message is clear, your headwear is your resume. You're ushered through to the central courtyard, which smells like ink and incense with a hint of roasted turnip. A frazzled eunuch with precisely oiled hair reads your name from a scroll and directs you to a line of stone benches under a vine-covered pergola. Apparently, you're not the only one called. A dozen others sit in quiet panic, all adjusting their hats nervously. Some tilt theirs forward to look more important, others remove theirs entirely, hoping invisibility might buy them time. A senior official approaches, his boots slapping the flagstones with the authority of someone who definitely didn't earn his job through quiet competence. He squints at the lot of you and then announces, "You are here to observe the process, the distribution, the evaluation. You'll witness how elegance becomes ordnance. How cloth becomes command. Poetic. Alarming. Slightly sweaty. One thing is certain, hats in the Tang court are not decorative. They are the visual grammar of the bureaucracy. Every inch of height, every tassel, every feather or strip of gilt says something about who you are, who your father was, how many poetry exams you passed, and whether you once made the emperor laugh with a clever couplet about geese. Historians still argue whether the elaborate ranking system for court hats originated purely as a method of social control, or whether it evolved naturally from earlier Han traditions. Some scholars even suggest it was about visibility, literally being able to spot who outranked whom in a crowded hall of robes and egos. Whatever the origin, what's undeniable is the obsession. One minister reportedly refused to take his hat off for surgery. Another had a replica made in gold to wear at home because he missed it too much after hours. As the group is herded into the Hall of Weights and Measures, which turns out to be a misleading name, it's mostly about ceremonial garb these days, you catch your reflection in a bronze mirror. Your current head wrap is, let's call it, functionally unremarkable. It's clean, sure. It keeps your hair out of your ink. But next to these lacquered monuments of textile artistry, you look like a lost kitchen servant. The hall's walls are lined with painted diagrams of hat styles. There's the Tong Tianguan, a high, thin hat that makes its wearer look forever surprised. There's the Pingdingjian, a flat-topped bureaucrat's cap that reportedly doubles as a writing surface in emergencies. Some of the fancier caps are held aloft on rods, meant to symbolize the wearer's spiritual detachment. One style, reserved for a specific branch of tax collectors, features side flaps large enough to swat flies without moving your head. The sheer variety is dizzying. And it gets more surreal. A nervous undersecretary explains that some of these hat assignments change daily, depending on the specific ritual calendar. You might wear a modest scholar's wrap on Tuesday and switch to a flame-colored foxfur cap for Friday's tea inspection. Outside, bells chime noon. The sun is high. You haven't been given food or water. But instead, someone shoves a scroll into your hands. This, the same eunuch tells you, is the manual of proper ornamentation according to function and fortune. Study it. You open it to a random page. It reads, Officials of the 6th rank shall not permit their tassels to exceed the length of their pinky finger, unless attending the ceremony of the 9 spoons, in which case the tassel may brush the clavicle. You close the scroll. You are in hat country now, and the road ahead is lined with velvet. The next morning begins with the solemn tolling of a bronze bell shaped like a gourd. You rise from your stiff mat in the guest quarters, rubbing the sleep from your eyes, and are met by a young aide who bows slightly before handing you something curious. A small lacquer box. Inside. Not food. Not ink. Not a friendly morning poem. Nope. It's a tiny hat. Well, the aide says, we wear these during the morning observation rounds. Symbolic. Non-binding. Try not to crush it. It's made of stiff paper, dyed deep indigo, with 2 small horn-like projections at the top. You perch it on your head, where it sits like a particularly judgmental insect. Outside, the corridors of the Bureau of Rights are bustling. Officials sweep past in a blur of black robes and focused grimaces, their hats fanning out like sails in a sea of silk. A breeze wafts in from the peach gardens and sends several side flaps flapping like startled bats. Today's task? Learning what the hats mean. You're ushered into a side gallery called the Chamber of Distinctions, which sounds like a wine cellar, but turns out to be a long hall filled with wooden busts, each one wearing a different official hat. Labels beneath each display provide basic information: rank, office, season of use, spiritual alignment, and whether or not the wearer is allowed to eat duck on Thursdays. As your guide begins the tour, you start to realize something. Hats are the government here. Rank, authority, access to documents, even seating order at banquets, all of it is visually communicated through headgear. See this one, the guide says, pointing to a squat, rounded cap trimmed with red silk. That's the Jinxianmo, worn by palace archivists. Looks humble, but don't be fooled, they control who gets to see the scrolls. He moves to another. This is the Kyong Meiguan, for senior astrologers. Wide brim, slightly tilted, because it's meant to reflect the tilt of the heavens. The hats are bizarrely specific. One style has ear holes for officials who must listen to public grievances. Another is topped with a jade frog for those who oversee irrigation projects. And then there's the famously loathed turtle-top hat, a padded monstrosity worn by tax collectors in provinces prone to rebellion, designed to soften the blow of thrown objects. You try not to laugh. You fail. Your guide smiles. Yes, we have humor too. Even here. The Tang Dynasty, for all its rigid formality, doesn't lack for satire. In fact, there are entire scrolls of poetry poking fun at court fashion. One anonymous verse reads, "He wore a cap so high and wide, it knocked out lamps on either side, yet still he bowed, with practiced grace, and claimed he ruled the outer space." But make no mistake, jokes aside, these hats are serious business. Misidentifying a superior's cap style can cost you your job. Or worse. There's a famous case of a scribe who greeted a mid-level official as a high commissioner, based on the flared width of his morning cap. Turned out, the commissioner had just borrowed his cousin's hat. The scribe was reassigned to inventory duty in a distant onion storage archive. Historians still argue whether this obsession with visual hierarchy was a product of Confucian ideals, or a practical response to the empire's sheer size and complexity. When you govern a population of over 50 million with thousands of bureaucrats in rotating posts, maybe the fastest way to establish authority is millinery. You move to the next bust, admiring a slender black hat with twin gold pins. That one, the guide says reverently, is only awarded to those who pass all 3 levels of the Jinshu examination and compose an original verse that makes the Empress Dowager smile. You whistle, low and respectful. But not all hats indicate prestige. Some are carefully crafted to display exactly how low someone ranks. The Yamaguan, a dull, felt affair worn by those who failed their exams multiple times, was nicknamed the donkey's apology. It sags forward slightly, as if bowing in permanent shame. You lean in closer to a particularly ornate example, a scarlet silk cap trimmed with peacock feathers and inset jade discs. Minister of Rights. Your guide whispers. Used only during the summer solstice ceremony. It's said to have its own storage closet. And its own servant. By now your head is swimming. Every style, every detail, from the number of tassel cords to the embroidery hidden inside the lining, means something. Nothing is accidental. You begin to notice the language of hats all around you. One clerk walks past with his side flaps tucked up, which, apparently, means, on urgent business. Another pins a sprig of plum blossom to his turban. It's not just decorative. It signals that he's filing a petition of moral concern. At lunch, you sit in a shaded courtyard and watch as a group of scholars debate the merits of the wuxiao mao, a common black gauze cap worn by lower-ranking officials. One claims its simplicity reflects Buddhist humility. Another calls it a sad sock with delusions of grandeur. You sip your tea quietly, grateful your paper hat hides your smirk. Before the afternoon session begins, you sneak a peek at the manual again. One passage reads, "Let no man wear a hat above his rank, nor fold his tassels in defiance of the stars," which is poetic and unhelpfully vague. Still, you're starting to get it. The court isn't just a place of rules, it's a place of symbols. And you're walking through a language written entirely in cloth, starch, lacquer, and feather. It's the third day, and by now you've accepted your fate. You're part of a slow-moving, exquisitely bureaucratic fashion parade. Every morning begins with a fresh hat. Today's is a modest silken wrap with a knot that loops like a dumpling. You're told it's worn by observers with no official mandate, which is a polite way of saying, "Look, but don't touch anything important." The morning briefing takes place in the Pavilion of Comparative Distinctions, where two elderly officials named Shui and Wen bicker gently in front of a silk backdrop embroidered with hats. You're starting to suspect their arguments are more performance than persuasion, like a scholarly puppet show. "Clearly," Shui says, waving a finger as if conducting an orchestra of invisible hats. The side flaps were widened under Emperor Zhongzong because his vision was poor. He needed to see who was bowing from further away. "Nonsense," replies Wen. That change coincided with the rise of the ceremonial tea officers. The wider flaps were to prevent spilled tea from staining the official's shoulders. Everyone knows that. You're not sure who's right, and to be honest, you suspect neither is. Historians still argue whether these evolving designs had more to do with court fashion trends or subtle acts of political rebellion. There's even a fringe theory that some hat styles were used as covert signals during palace intrigues, like semaphore, but embroidered. Your group is then led to the hat assignment table, which sounds like a game, and honestly, sort of is. A massive wooden board stretches across the hall, with slots for names, positions, and the corresponding hat style. One clerk shifts the labels around while another double-checks against the scroll of protocol adjustments for the month of clear wind. You're told this process happens weekly. Weekly. Imagine rewriting every government dress code 52 times a year. Now imagine that everyone's job security depends on noticing the tiniest change, like whether a ceremonial undervisor is folded left or right on Thursdays during rain. You glance at one poor official who's just discovered that his hat assignment has shifted from the peach tint ministerial category to drab sage tier 2. The color drained from his face so fast you wonder if hat dye might be involved. It's becoming clear to you now, hats aren't just a form of visual hierarchy. They're currency, power, identity, and for some, survival. Take the case of Li Hang, a low-ranking grain accountant from the province of Shu. According to your scroll, and recounted with gossipy glee by one of the older eunuchs, Li once filed a petition that impressed the emperor so much he was elevated 3 ranks. But no one informed the tailors. For 2 weeks, Li kept showing up in his modest cloth cap while everyone else bowed to him awkwardly and whispered behind his back. When his new hat finally arrived, complete with phoenix embroidery and a gold thread tassel, he reportedly slept in it for a month. You wander past a set of dusty mannequins modeling obsolete styles. There's a cloud hat made of layers of dyed silk, long out of fashion after an incident involving a startled goose. A double-winged scholar's helm that was banned after a junior examiner got stuck in a doorway during the spring examinations. And a bizarre invention called the bureaucrat's canopy, a hat so wide it required 2 attendants to adjust. It lasted exactly 1 week before collapsing under its own symbolism. But not all changes are absurd. One of the scholars explains that in times of national mourning, such as after an emperor's death, the entire court adopts a neutral headpiece called the Kian, made from undyed silk and worn low over the brow. The effect is striking, a sea of pale, bowed heads moving slowly through the palace like ghostly reeds in wind. Sometimes, the hats speak louder than words. You begin to wonder what your own hypothetical hat might say. Would it be a plain clerk's wrap with ink stains? A low-flapped administrative assistant's model with understated embroidery? Or, dare you imagine, a ceremonial observer's soft-brimmed crown reserved for special imperial consultants? Don't get ahead of yourself. You haven't even passed the basic test yet. That's right. There's a test. After lunch, you're led to a shaded portico and handed a writing board, a quill, and a tightly rolled scroll. The title reads, Imperial Garb Comprehension and Interpretation Assessment, Level 1, Preliminary. You let out a sound that is half sigh, half chuckle. Of course there's a hat exam. Why wouldn't there be? The questions are a wild blend of the practical and the absurd. What hat is appropriate for a deputy minister attending an eclipse viewing ceremony during a leap month? Explain the symbolism of peacock feathers versus kingfisher feathers in hat ornamentation. Describe, in verse, the emotional essence of the plum blossom visor style. You do your best, sketching a particularly pitiful limerick about a tassel lost in the wind, and submit your work with trembling fingers. You're told the results will be posted in the morning, on the hat ledger board, of course. Publicly. In front of everyone. What could possibly go wrong? As you walk back to your quarters, the sun is beginning to set, casting long shadows through the tiled corridors. You pass a pair of junior scribes comparing the stiffness of their ceremonial sashes with the same competitive tension found in modern Fashion Week runways. You smile. It's exhausting. It's ridiculous. It's somehow charming. You're not sure whether this experience is making you wiser, or simply better at pretending to understand things that no sane person should be expected to track. But for now, you adjust your tiny ceremonial cap, square your shoulders, and walk on like someone who knows exactly how long their tassels are allowed to be. You wake with a jolt to the sound of official footsteps echoing like a polite avalanche down the corridor. Today is Hat Results Day. There's a nervous buzz in the air, like the eve of national exams or the moment before a school play curtain rises. You dress quickly, modestly, respectfully, and with some hesitation, choose to wear no hat at all. Better to look humble than presumptuous if things go poorly. Outside in the courtyard, the hat ledger board has been unfurled like a giant silk scroll draped across a lacquered frame. Names are listed in careful brushwork, followed by narrow columns denoting hat style, temporary rank, and ceremonial confidence index. That last one is still a mystery, but the eunuchs nod at it sagely as if it has existed since the invention of paper. You scan the list. There you are. Guest observer, soft fan edge wrap, apprentice grade, confidence index, 43%. Well, not dazzling, but not a disaster. You're given a congratulatory nod from a clerk whose own confidence index is only 28%, so you decide not to dwell. With your new assignment comes your first real duty, assisting in the weekly Bureau of Outer Garment Justification. That's not a joke. It's a thing. Essentially, you're tagging along with mid-tier officials who inspect the hats and robes of lower-ranking scribes to ensure they conform to the correct seasonal, astrological, and symbolic parameters. The form used is 3 feet long and includes columns like flap orientation satisfactory, Y/N. Does the wearer maintain appropriate somberness of tassel sway? Jade ornamentation level, harmonious/excessive/sinfully reflective. You follow behind Senior Inspector Meow, whose personal hat features a narrow peak designed to mimic a crane's beak. He seems proud of it, gently tilting his head whenever he speaks so the beak leads the way. At one point, you watch him correct a junior assistant whose hat is fastened with a phoenix motif pin instead of the expected turtle one. I'm overseeing grain records, not dreams, the assistant grumbles. Inspector Meow, never one to show emotion, simply writes spiritual confusion in accessory choice on his form and moves on. You help by checking off minor compliance points: robe stitch density, plume positioning, symmetry of tassel dangle. After an hour, the work becomes strangely soothing, like filing away puzzle pieces made of fabric and expectation. It's here that you start to realize something. This is not just vanity. This is ritual, repeated endlessly, making the machine of empire run smoothly. In a way, it's like music. Everyone plays their note, however small, until the melody becomes governance. Later, over lunch in the Jade Gallery courtyard, so named for the one jade tile that someone tripped over once, Inspector Meow tells you the story of how a minor governor once received the wrong hat by mistake. It had twin silver flaps instead of single bronze ones. The man, confused but compliant, wore it without question. For 3 days, no one noticed, until a border magistrate bowed too low and cracked his nose on one of the flaps. A small investigation ballooned into a week-long inquiry. Imperial mail couriers were dispatched. 3 hats were recalled. 1 artisan was exiled to a county that didn't even wear hats. The whole ordeal became known as the slightly silver flap incident. There are still poems about it. None flattering. You ask if the emperor himself ever gets embroiled in these hat dramas. Meow's eyes twinkle behind his rimless spectacles. Oh yes, he says. But discreetly. The emperor's ceremonial hat, the Huangguan, is so elaborate it has a shadow staff dedicated to its upkeep. There's a scroll longer than your arm listing which angle the sun must hit it during state appearances. There are rumors, he tells you, that one of the former emperors, Gaozong, once swapped his hat with a musician's for a day just to confuse the court. No one dared say a word, of course, but the palace was mysteriously silent for hours. They say even the birds stopped chirping. And while this might sound amusing, these stories also hint at something deeper. The hats aren't just about who you are. They're about who you pretend to be. And the line between the two. Very, very thin. You return to your quarters later, brain humming with new data. You lie down, close your eyes, and try to name every hat type you've seen so far. You get to 17 before drifting off. And in your dream, you're wearing a hat made entirely of plum blossoms and paper cranes. Everyone bows as you pass. You nod solemnly, even though your hat is on backward. Somehow, no one seems to mind. You wake with a stiff neck and a head full of soft dreams and stiff headwear. But there's no time to linger. Today, you've been invited to observe the inner workings of the Hat Design Bureau, a rare privilege, you're told, normally reserved for veteran tailors, retired ministers, and the occasional lost poet. The building itself is tucked within the east wing of the palace complex, behind a gate carved with interlocking birds. It smells faintly of ink, cedarwood, and something spicy, maybe cinnamon, maybe the slow burn of bureaucratic ambition. Inside, it's more workshop than office. Long tables are covered in scrolls, cloth samples, and odd-shaped hat molds stacked like puzzle pieces. Sunlight filters through tall windows, making the floating dust look like golden thread. And everywhere you turn, there are diagrams, meticulous renderings of hats in every imaginable form, annotated in a scholar's hand. Your guide is Master Chen, a design archivist whose own headpiece is a marvel of understatement. Dark silk, 5 ridges, and a single embroidered crane so delicate it might fly away. Chen moves slowly, as though reluctant to disturb the spirits of ancient tailors. The purpose of a hat, he says without turning, is not to sit on the head. It is to announce the wearer's relationship to the stars. You nod solemnly, though you're not entirely sure what that means. He takes you to the experimental wing form repository, which is less dramatic than it sounds, but only just. Inside are prototype headpieces that never made it to public use. One resembles a fan unfolded sideways. Another looks suspiciously like a small parasol. Too noisy in the wind, Chen says, tapping the parasol hat. He pauses before a large scroll mounted on the wall, titled Hat Variations Proposed under Empress Wu, discarded due to political tension. You blink. That's quite a header. Here you find some of the strangest concepts. A triangular cap meant to symbolize moral clarity, rejected after a general wore it during a failed siege. A dual plume cap for female officials that was quickly shelved when court astrologers found the feathers clashed with Venus's alignment. Historians still argue whether Empress Wu's proposals were sincere fashion reforms, Chen says, or symbolic flexes designed to unsettle the male ministers. You lean in to examine a rejected design: twin silk cones dyed indigo, joined by a golden clasp at the crown. It's labeled Heavenly Arbitration Hat. What was this one for? No one's sure. Possibly a compromise hat, worn when two officials of equal rank refused to bow to each other. Chen then leads you to the dye chamber, where pigments are prepared using traditional methods: ground mineral, crushed flowers, even powdered jade for high ceremonial pieces. A young apprentice, her sleeves rolled, is mixing a vat of beetle shell lacquer that will yield a shimmering purple reserved only for archivists and the emperor's calligraphy tutors. You'd think purple would be more common, you say, watching the mixture swirl. Ah, says Chen, but it's notoriously unstable. In the summer heat, it fades to a sad gray. There was once a summer when half the ministers were mistaken for funeral officials. You file that away under Fashion Catastrophes of the Tang Court. Just before lunch, Chen offers you a chance to try something. You are handed a narrow brush, a square of thick parchment, and a basic template, the outline of a hat with a blank crown. Design your own symbol, he says. You panic. But only a little. After a few wobbly strokes, you've drawn a crescent moon over a scroll. Chen examines it with exaggerated seriousness. Scholarship under nighttime conditions, he says. Possibly insomnia. Let's go with quiet diligence. You offer, hopefully. Chen smiles faintly and stamps it with a wax seal. Not awful. You float out of the design bureau in a daze, pockets smelling of cedar and dye. That evening, you dine with a young official in training named Min, whose forehead bears the red ink smudge of someone who's been adjusting their forehead band too often. Min is passionate about hat geometry and claims to have invented a new fold that reduces forehead sweating by a full 17%. Would you like to see my draft patent? Before you can reply, Min has unfurled a full diagram complete with sweat drop trajectory simulations. You study the angles, nodding as if you completely understand thermal hat ergonomics. Min confides that his dream is to one day join the Bureau of Seasonal Accessorization, which controls how accessories like plumes and brooches shift with lunar cycles and political anniversaries. It's the highest art, he says. The emperor once paused a royal decree because someone's ribbon was the wrong shade of equinox peach. You can't tell if he's exaggerating. And honestly, you don't want to know. That night, before sleep, you stare up at the ceiling and imagine what future historians will make of all this. Will they argue about the real purpose of side flaps? Debate the symbolic import of plum-colored tassels? Or will they just marvel that an entire civilization managed to say so much with so little, one hat at a time? And somewhere, maybe, they'll find your not quite awful design, stamped in red wax. The morning mist hangs low over the palace grounds as you make your way to the archives, summoned by a curt but polite scroll that reads, "Report to the Bureau of Hat Precedents. Bring clean hands and a quiet mind." Inside the archive hall, the air is dry and smells of parchment, aged wood, and a faint tang of ink that never fully dries. You're greeted by Archivist Joe, a man with a voice like warm rice porridge and a hat so tall it has its own shadow. He ushers you into the chronological hat ledger room, which sounds like a punishment, but is, surprisingly, a marvel. Stacked floor to ceiling are bamboo scrolls and stitched manuscripts, some older than the dynasty itself. Each one meticulously records the history, evolution, and social impact of specific hat types. There's even a small side collection labeled Hat Rumors and Apocrypha. Zhou catches you peeking. Yes, some claim one Tang minister wore a hat so wide he could shelter 3 scribes beneath it during monsoon season. Others say that's just metaphor. You're here today to help trace the origin of an unusual court hat that recently resurfaced in a painting donated by a minor prefect. The painting depicts an official wearing what appears to be a standard, double-winged integrity cap, but the wings are reversed. This is potentially explosive, Zhou says, his breath fogging slightly in the archive chill. Backward wings symbolize withdrawal of favor. But the date on this scroll suggests he was promoted shortly after. He hands you a smaller scroll, slightly singed on one edge. It's a court memorandum debating the ethics of rotating hat flaps 180 degrees. One faction argued it indicated humility, another called it visual treason. You raise your eyebrows. Historians still argue whether reversed flaps were ever officially sanctioned, Zhou murmurs. Or if they were just clever sabotage. You and Zhou spend the morning cross-referencing hat legislation records, many written in poetic euphemism to avoid upsetting celestial patterns. One reads, "Let not the crest overshadow the wearer, lest the stars realign in mockery." There's a peculiar joy in decoding bureaucratic poetry about headgear. As midday approaches, you take a break in the atrium where junior clerks copy diagrams onto silk panels. One shows the infamous hat of endless caution, a rarely worn cap shaped like a bell, designed to remind the wearer of the weight of office. It was supposedly so heavy it gave its inventor chronic neck spasms. You overhear two clerks arguing over a footnote in a decree by Emperor Taizong. One insists it proves that feathered side ornaments were only to be worn during state banquets. The other says no, they were allowed on market inspection days too. You'd intervene, but frankly, they both sound equally plausible. Returning to Zhou, you find him deeply engrossed in a ledger from the time of Emperor Xuanzong. The page is filled with dozens of official titles, each tied to a specific hat model. Deputy of Salt Affairs, split ridge with pearl threading. Minister of Tax Reconciliation, 3 crests shaped like account scrolls. Royal Calligrapher's Assistant, low brim with ink drop pattern embroidery. You spot an entry titled Hat of Sorrowful Administration and point to it. "Ah," says Zhou. "Worn during post-famine budget hearings. Required by decree." Later, you're granted access to a rare artifact, the preserved remnants of an actual Tang official's hat, stored in a climate-controlled case. The silk has faded, the stitching fragile, but the faint outline of the hat's plum blossom motif remains. You stare at it for a long time. The idea that someone wore this centuries ago, maybe while worrying about taxation ratios or whether plum color was too cheerful for drought season, it humbles you. Hats, you realize, aren't just style. They are fossilized choices, expressions of political nuance and social grammar. Before you leave, Zhou gives you a copy of a riddle once posted in the bureau's hallway as a test of judgment. If a minister's hat has 5 folds but only 4 truths, which fold must be removed before his speech can be trusted? There is no answer. That night, as you return to your quarters, your mind buzzes with dates, feather types, and philosophical implications of flap angles. You fall asleep rereading your notes, which now contain such illuminating phrases as Disputed Ribbon Law of 728 CE, Allegorical Cap Dispute, Year of the Boar, Use of Tassels as Silent Protest, Possible but Unconfirmed. And somewhere in your dreams, a flock of bureaucrats in increasingly elaborate hats argues over how much sky a brim may block before it becomes insolence. You wake smiling. You're beginning to notice it now, that gentle transformation happening behind your eyes. The hats are starting to make sense. Not just as objects, but as language. Social grammar. Symbolic punctuation to a sentence no one dares speak aloud. Today, you're headed into the Court of Ranks, where decisions about official titles, and, by extension, their accompanying headwear, are debated, issued, and sometimes fiercely contested. The chamber sits within a stone courtyard lined with flowering cassia trees. Even here, the scent of bureaucracy lingers. Sandalwood ink, dusted rice paper, the subtle tension of men in layered robes measuring each other with the tilt of a brow. A clerk named Fei, young and perpetually out of breath, escorts you past rows of jade tablets that list all recognized ranks from the illustrious 1st grade down to the not quite respected 9th. Each one comes with a hat design regulated down to millimeter precision. Fei gestures to the tablets with a sigh. The difference between a 6th grade justice deputy and a 6th grade agricultural evaluator? About half a tassel's width. You raise an eyebrow. Tassel density, he adds. Big deal. Fei explains that the Court of Ranks uses something called the 8 measures of merit to determine who gets promoted. These include things like moral uprightness, administrative skill, calligraphy elegance, and, somewhat confusingly, appropriate head posture. Apparently, slouching has consequences. Inside the chamber, officials sit behind lacquered desks, reviewing scrolls that propose upgrades or downgrades. The tone is subdued, but you sense the stakes. Zhou Wei requests elevation to 5th grade, citing successful river dredging and improved goat census accuracy. A pause. An elder official strokes his beard. Goats were undercounted last year. Yes, but only by 3. That's within seasonal variance. Someone else flips through a scroll. His hat has already been upgraded. Was he anticipating approval? A collective murmur. It's not a scandal, exactly. But it's frowned upon. Historians still argue whether such anticipatory hat-wearing was ever formally punished, Fei whispers. Or just quietly mocked in verse. You suppress a grin. The next petitioner is a widow arguing posthumous promotion for her husband, who died while auditing millet stores. She has brought the proposed hat as part of her plea, a soft creased model with silver threading, appropriate for a 5th grade grain auditor. She holds it delicately in both hands, as if offering a folded prayer. The officials vote silently, each dropping a carved jade token into a wooden box. When the box is opened, the verdict is unanimous. The hat is granted. You watch as the widow nods with quiet dignity. Someone rolls up the scroll. The hat will be ceremonially displayed at her husband's ancestral shrine. Not to be worn, but to affirm that he could have worn it. And somehow, that seems to matter. Later, Fei shows you a wall chart mapping the entire hierarchy of Tang officialdom. It's a dizzying cascade of rectangles, names, and symbols, each one paired with a hat sketch. Side plumes. Folded bands. Gold thread inlays. You feel like you're reading a family tree for very serious peacocks. You spot a box labeled, Unranked Servitors, No Hat. You gesture toward it. Fei shrugs. Some people serve without rank. Without rank, no hat. Without a hat, you're invisible. That night, back in your sleeping quarters, you lie on your side, trying to imagine your reflection in a polished bronze mirror. Would you be 1st grade? Probably not. 5th? 7th? You picture a humble cap, modest flap, decent crest, maybe a tasteful tassel. Something that says, reliable, occasionally witty, doesn't spill ink. And just like that, your dreams begin. Rows of officials gliding down corridors, their hats casting long, orderly shadows. One turns and winks at you, his tassel brushing the edge of the moon. You wake to the sound of bell chimes, a signal that today is a hat inspection day. These are scheduled irregularly, perhaps intentionally, so that officials can't over-prepare. You dress quickly, slipping into observation robes, and follow the river of robes and hushed conversation, winding toward the outer hall of the Ministry of Rights. The sun is rising lazily, throwing amber streaks across the stone pathways. You pass a judge in a robe so stiff it creaks, a tax minister whose hat appears recently lacquered, and a nervous-looking secretary adjusting the angle of his forehead plaque with a sliver of mirror hidden in his sleeve. Today's event? A quarterly review of conformance to regalia standards, an effort led by the Ritual Consistency Subcommission. It's about hats, but also posture, robe length, plume angle, and whether the silk sheen matches your grade. At the door, you're handed a pamphlet of official hat infractions. The violations range from minor, tassel fray, upper right quadrant, to severe, insubordinate crest height. Your favorite reads simply, hat projects delusions of grandeur inconsistent with office. Inside, the inspection begins. Officials line up, heads bowed, as junior scribes pace with measuring sticks, silk swatches, and small lacquer boxes holding thread samples. If a discrepancy is found, it's not shouted or even spoken. A slip of paper is passed. A red circle is drawn. And occasionally, someone is quietly removed for plume recalibration. You spot one offender whose hat leans ever so slightly to the left. The scribe squints, adjusts a plumb line, and draws a tiny in the margin of his record tablet. Historians still argue whether marginal question marks had disciplinary consequences, murmurs a clerk next to you, or were just passive-aggressive documentation. During a break, you're ushered into the Hall of Diagrammed Hats, a gallery that rivals any palace library. Each display shows a specific model, its era, intended rank, symbolic function, and known controversies. You pause in front of a curious design, a cap shaped like a compressed hill, meant to evoke stability and humility. Unfortunately, it also resembled a well-known chamber pot of the era. Discontinued after only 7 months, your guide notes. For aesthetic reasons. In the back, there's a small but moving exhibit on female court officials and their unique headgear, less documented, yet no less symbolic. Some wore narrow silk headbands with stitched script denoting their moral virtues or areas of expertise, like astronomy or silkwork supervision. One display features the so-called ethereal cap of Lady Wren, a poet official whose hat bore painted clouds and a strip of jade. Officials debated for weeks whether the design violated the rule against headgear that might outshine the heavens. She kept the hat, and the poem she wrote about it still circulates. After the inspection, the court regroups for regalia review recitation, where scribes read aloud newly proposed reforms. Today's proposals include limiting tassel swish length, due to distraction during imperial decrees, and banning pearl glinting during sunrise ceremonies. Both motions are passed with mild enthusiasm. You're asked to weigh in on an emerging debate. Should officials with chronic neck stiffness be allowed to wear lighter, modified hats, even if it compromises the official shape? You suggest a hidden internal frame, wooden supports shaped like the traditional crest, but hollow. The idea is met with polite interest. One official jots it down on a scroll labeled, "Innovations Not Yet Offensive." That evening, you write in your notebook by lamplight, recalling the unspoken tension that floats through every inspection. These hats are not just uniforms. They're reputations, aspirations, cautionary tales worn proudly. You list your favorite hat notes of the day. Hat with silk baffle, meant to prevent public outbursts. The almost rank cap, worn only by men awaiting promotion for 7 years or longer. Crest of provisional authority, given with the phrase, "until the emperor notices otherwise." Your eyes droop as you imagine a world where modern jobs required hats this elaborate. Would dentists wear bristle caps? Would baristas have latte-plumed helmets? As you drift off, a final thought floats past. Maybe hats don't just tell others who you are. Maybe they remind you, too. You wake slowly to the scent of jasmine tea and the low murmur of the marketplace outside your window. Today, you're headed to the bustling provincial offices, where Tang officials' hats take on a slightly different flavor, literally and figuratively. Unlike the imperial court's polished rituals, provincial hat decisions mix practical concerns with local customs, quirks, and even a dash of gossip. Walking through the city's narrow alleys, you notice how officials in the provinces favor sturdier, less ornate hats. The climate here is warmer, and the officials are often on horseback or walking long distances, so comfort sometimes trumps ceremony. Still, hats remain key markers of status and authority. Your guide, a genial clerk named Ming, explains that while the Ministry of Rights issues the overarching regulations, local magistrates have some leeway to adapt hats to regional needs. This results in fascinating variations: feather embellishments replaced by dyed horsehair, silk tassels swapped for dyed cotton, or small embroidered patches added to signal special local honors. Ming leads you to the Provincial Administrative Hall, where a recent scandal has erupted. A magistrate, it seems, has been accused of sporting a false feather in his hat, a dyed chicken plume passed off as a rare crane feather. This deception, though subtle, is considered a serious breach of etiquette, signaling an overreach of rank. You attend a hearing where witnesses debate whether the feather truly counts as fake or just a misunderstood local tradition. One elderly farmer insists, "In our valley, chicken feathers have always been prized above crane feathers for their sturdiness." Another official counters that imperial protocol is clear: no feathers unless they are genuine crane or peacock. Historians still argue whether these regional variations ever influenced the central court's strict regulations or remained charming exceptions. You spot a side exhibit of hats worn by lower-ranking officials responsible for tax collection, water management, and grain storage. Their headgear is practical: broad brims for sun protection, detachable flaps for dust, and simple decorative elements showing their department. Ming shows you a fascinating hat worn by a tax officer who doubled as a poet. This hat, embroidered with small verses, was his silent protest against corrupt practices, hidden messages only fellow poets could read. You chuckle quietly, imagining these officials communicating subversively through hat embroidery. Secret poetry caps, you muse aloud. As the afternoon shadows lengthen, you settle beneath a paper lantern outside a tea house. Ming pours you another cup and explains that in some villages, hats also play a role in matchmaking. A young official's hat color might signal his availability or family background, though, naturally, this is unofficial. You sip your tea, the delicate bitterness grounding you. The hats of the provinces, you realize, are not just symbols of rank but living artifacts: practical, political, poetic, and sometimes even playful. As twilight descends, you picture a procession of provincial officials moving through the streets, their hats bobbing gently like colorful boats on a slow river. You feel the hum of the day settle inside you, a gentle reminder that behind every hat is a person with hopes, secrets, and stories yet untold. The morning air is crisp as you follow a narrow path winding through bamboo groves to a lesser-known venue, the Tang Dynasty Hat Makers Guild. This is where the actual hats are crafted, each stitch a whisper of tradition, each tassel a thread of authority. You step inside a fragrant workshop filled with the soft rustle of silk, the metallic ring of tools, and the low murmur of artisans discussing the day's commissions. Your guide, an elder named Lao Chen, explains that these artisans are the unsung heroes of officialdom. They don't just make hats, they encode the complex social hierarchy into fabric and thread. Each hat is a delicate balance between craftsmanship and symbolism, a wearable code. Lao Chen shows you a nearly finished hat destined for a fifth-grade official. Its black silk cap is embroidered with golden phoenix feathers, a nod to benevolence and grace. The tassels hang just so, weighted to sway gently but never distract. He runs his fingers over the tiny gold studs, each one hammered by hand, polished until it gleams softly in the lantern light. You learn that materials are strictly regulated. Only specific silk qualities, types of feathers, and even dyes sourced from particular regions are permitted. Deviations can lead to immediate rejection or worse, an accusation of arrogance. An apprentice chimes in, telling a quiet story about a hat made from rare blue silk that accidentally included a flawed batch of thread. The official who wore it was teased mercilessly for wearing a night sky full of holes. The apprentice laughs, but you detect a trace of sympathy. Lao Chen invites you to try your hand at some embroidery. You fumble with the needle, stitching an imperfect yet earnest pattern of clouds and mountains. He smiles, telling you that no hatmaker was ever born perfect, it is the effort that counts. You overhear a debate among the guild members about whether the intricate hat designs influence the official's behavior, whether wearing a dignified hat truly makes a man more responsible or if it simply encourages vanity. Historians still argue whether hats shaped the man or masked him, one artisan remarks as she ties a delicate tassel knot. Near the back of the workshop, you notice a small shelf lined with retired hats, faded, frayed, but still majestic. Lao Chen explains these are memory hats, kept to honor officials long gone. Some bear ink stains from late-night scroll reading, others are singed from ceremonial fires. Before you leave, he offers a humble but profound thought: a hat is more than cloth and thread. It's a promise, a silent pact between wearer and world. You nod slowly, feeling the weight of that pact settle softly on your own head, even if only imagined. You wake in the quiet dawn to a different rhythm, the ritual of imperial court announcements, where hats serve as subtle signals in a carefully choreographed dance. Today, you accompany a low-ranking official to the Palace of Ceremonies, a vast hall where every movement, whisper, and hat tilt carries meaning. As you enter, you notice the tension beneath the grandeur. Officials line up facing the emperor's throne, hats polished and plumes perfectly arranged. The silence is punctuated only by the shuffling of silk robes and the faint scrape of sandals on marble. You learn that even the way an official positions his hat during announcements conveys status and allegiance. Slight tilts to the right might indicate deference, a slight lift could signal readiness, and a lowered brim might be a discreet protest, though such subtleties risk imperial displeasure. A senior courtier whispers to you that the emperor's favorite pastime is watching these non-verbal cues, reading the room without uttering a word. It's a game of power and poise played atop delicate threads. Today's announcement concerns newly appointed officials, their ranks sealed not just by imperial decree but by the hats they're allowed to wear. As names are called, you observe the subtle shifts in hat ornamentation. New tassels, slightly taller crests, more elaborate embroideries. One young official receives a hat adorned with a single phoenix feather, a rare honor. His smile is tight, but you notice a tremor in his fingers as he steadies the plume. Historians still argue whether such honors truly elevated an official's influence or merely added pressure to perform, your companion murmurs. During the break, you explore the palace gardens, where officials remove their hats to enjoy a rare moment of respite. You overhear gossip about a recently disgraced minister whose hat was confiscated overnight, a silent but profound humiliation. Nearby, a group of eunuchs compare hat shapes, debating the merits of different plume lengths. You can't help but chuckle at their earnestness. As the day fades, you consider the complexity of these hats. They're not just symbols but instruments of silent communication, carefully calibrated to uphold an intricate social order. You wonder what it must have been like to live in a world where your hat's tilt could spark intrigue, loyalty, or downfall. As night falls, the hats rest silently on stands, awaiting another day's dance of power and ritual. You find yourself wandering through the narrow stone corridors of the Ministry of Rights archives, where dusty scrolls and brittle documents quietly guard secrets about hat regulations. The air is thick with the scent of aged paper and ink, a kind of time capsule preserved for centuries. Here, the rules governing who could wear which hat are inscribed with almost religious reverence. A scholarly archivist named Lu guides you through piles of decrees, memoranda, and poetic mandates. He points to an ancient scroll detailing the exact dimensions, colors, and decorations assigned to each official rank's headwear, a veritable blueprint for Tang-era fashion bureaucracy. The scrolls reveal astonishing precision, feather types classified by species and region, tassel lengths measured in centimeters, silk hues defined by plant dyes harvested on specific lunar dates. The level of control might seem excessive, but Lu explains it was necessary to maintain order and prevent social chaos. You pause at a faded illustration showing a dizzying array of officials in hats that look more like intricate crowns or delicate bird nests than simple caps. It's a vivid reminder of how seriously Tang China took symbolism and hierarchy. Lu shares a curious detail about an old law requiring officials to replace their hats every 3 years, or whenever their rank changed, with penalties ranging from fines to temporary demotion for non-compliance. This policy ensured hats remained fresh and relevant, reinforcing visible markers of authority. You ask if any officials ever rebelled against these strictures. Lu chuckles softly, recounting a famous story of a magistrate who dared to add a tiny jade bead to his hat tassel, a subtle act of personal flair that ignited scandal at court. His punishment? A week of wearing a simple cloth cap, a symbolic loss of dignity. Historians still debate whether these detailed regulations actually empowered officials or stifled individuality, with some arguing that hats became prisons rather than symbols. You trace your fingers over a diagram illustrating the hat ladder, a visual guide for promotions and demotions marked entirely by headwear changes. It's a fascinating system where ambition, decorum, and identity intertwined tightly. As you leave the archives, the silence seems deeper, the weight of centuries settling softly on your shoulders. You awaken to the distant clang of a bell echoing through the city. Today's lesson is about the social rituals entwined with Tang hats beyond officialdom. You find yourself at a bustling festival, where hats serve not only as symbols of rank but also as playful tools in public life. The streets are alive with merchants, entertainers, and townsfolk. Amid the crowd, officials parade proudly, their hats adorned with bright feathers and shimmering silk, catching sunlight like miniature flags. Yet, it's the common folk who cleverly mimic these hats during celebrations, donning exaggerated versions to tease authority and break the usual social order for a day. You watch a troupe of performers wearing oversized official hats, dancing and juggling, provoking laughter and gentle satire. Their antics remind you that even in the rigid Tang hierarchy, humor and subversion found a place. A nearby vendor offers hats fashioned from paper and bamboo, inexpensive imitations that children wear with pride. The vendor tells you these playful hats helped youngsters learn about their elders' roles, mixing education with amusement. You overhear a scholar debating whether these festivals helped diffuse social tensions or subtly challenged imperial control. Historians still argue whether such events reinforced respect or encouraged mockery, the scholar says with a knowing smile. As you stroll, you notice how officials adjust their hats in response to the crowd's mood, some tightening their silk chin straps when laughter grows loud, others tilting their brims slightly to shield themselves from friendly jabs. The festival culminates with a grand hat-tying contest, where officials and commoners compete to craft the most elaborate and balanced hat decorations. You watch as silk tassels twirl and feathers flutter, each contestant focused yet enjoying the light-hearted competition. By evening, you reflect on how these public moments humanize the symbols of power. Hats become bridges between rulers and ruled, blending respect with levity. As lanterns glow softly, you imagine the many stories woven into every feather and thread, a rich tapestry of tradition, play, and subtle rebellion. You feel the gentle pulse of the crowd fade into the night, a reminder that even the strictest customs can hold room for laughter. You step into the serene gardens of a Tang official's residence, where the importance of hats extends beyond public ceremony into private life. Here, hats signal not just rank but mood, intention, and even unspoken communication within family and close circles. Your host, Lady May, a woman known for her sharp wit and keen sense of fashion, invites you to observe a quiet afternoon tea gathering. Around the low table, officials and their spouses adjust their hats in subtle ways that convey feelings without words. Lady May explains how different hat styles were paired with specific occasions: a softer, more flexible cap for informal visits, a stiffened, elaborate hat reserved for formal discussions, and a modest embroidered bonnet for family prayers. She points out how slight shifts, a hat tilted just so or a tassel lightly pulled, could signal approval, concern, or even gentle disagreement. It's a nuanced dance of fabric and gesture, a conversation beyond speech. You notice how officials remove their hats indoors, yet sometimes keep a small ornamental piece on, a miniature emblem of their public persona carried into private moments. Lady May shares a charming story of her husband signaling his desire for quiet company by lightly touching the feather on his hat, an intimate language only their closest friends understood. "It's like a secret handshake, but with feathers," she laughs softly. Historians still debate whether these private hat customs influenced broader court etiquette or simply mirrored it. As the afternoon sun filters through paper windows, you sense the hat's dual nature, both shield and window, guarding dignity while revealing subtle truths. Later, you explore a small cabinet filled with hat accessories, silk ribbons, jade pins, tiny bells, that added personal flair or quiet reminders to officials. Lady May remarks that these details helped officials carry their roles gracefully, reminding themselves of duties and loved ones alike. As the tea cools and shadows lengthen, you feel the quiet intimacy of hats, not just as symbols of power but as companions in the intricate theater of daily life. You tuck this gentle discovery into your thoughts as dusk settles softly. You rise early to the faint aroma of incense and freshly ground pigments. Today you delve into the mysterious world of hat maintenance, a surprisingly elaborate ritual behind every official's polished appearance. The Tang Dynasty placed great importance not just on wearing the right hat, but on caring for it meticulously, almost as if the hat were an extension of the official's very soul. In a quiet workshop filled with soft cloths, fragrant oils, and delicate brushes, you meet Master Wei, the revered hat caretaker to several court officials. His fingers move deftly, polishing silk surfaces and carefully adjusting tassels, whispering to each hat as if it were a living being. You learn that officials followed strict grooming routines to keep their hats pristine. Dust was brushed away with specially made feather dusters, silk was gently cleaned with herbal infusions, and wooden hat frames were treated to prevent warping in humid seasons. Master Wei reveals a curious practice. Officials occasionally sent their hats to be blessed by monks, who recited calming chants over the fabric to instill peace and focus. While some saw this as superstition, others believed it brought good fortune in the turbulent court. Historians still argue whether these maintenance rituals were practical necessities or ceremonial acts, reinforcing the official's sense of order and control. You watch as a damaged tassel is painstakingly repaired using fine gold thread, a process requiring hours of patience and precision. It strikes you how a simple thread's replacement might carry as much weight as a new appointment. Master Wei tells a quiet tale about an official who once lost a tassel during a crucial ceremony, a minor mishap that ironically led to unexpected leniency from the emperor, perhaps due to the official's visible humility. As you leave, your hands still tingling from touching the soft silk, you appreciate how much care and symbolism was woven into the upkeep of these hats, a daily ritual of respect for both tradition and self. Outside, the world feels calmer, as if the very act of tending a hat carried a small, soothing magic. You wander into the echoing halls of a Tang Dynasty academy, where young scholars undergo the rigorous training that could one day earn them the coveted right to wear an official hat. Here, hats represent more than rank, they're the tangible reward for years of study, discipline, and navigating the maze of imperial examinations. You join a class mid-lesson, where students recite Confucian classics, their voices soft but steady. The promise of a hat, a symbol of officialdom and social prestige, looms over every lesson, every carefully penned character. A seasoned tutor explains the process. The highest scorers in the exams receive hats with intricate gold embroidery and feather decorations, marking their elevated status. Lesser ranks earn simpler headgear, but any hat worn is a step into the complex world of Tang bureaucracy. You notice students nervously adjusting their caps, each hoping their hat will match their dreams by exam season. Curiously, some students personalize their caps with tiny embroidered symbols, dragons for courage, cranes for longevity, though official rules frowned on such flourishes. Historians still debate whether these personal touches represented quiet rebellion or harmless individuality in a strictly regulated system. Between lessons, you overhear a whispered rumor about a prodigy who secretly crafted a hat so splendid it caused a stir in the imperial court, raising questions about merit, favoritism, and the power of appearance. You imagine the pressure each student faces, balancing personal ambition with the weight of centuries-old traditions. Outside, the academy garden is dotted with hats resting on stone benches, each one a silent promise of the future, a future where wearing the right hat could change a life. As dusk falls, the students file out, hats perched proudly, ready to face whatever challenges the next day will bring. You find yourself in a quiet, scholarly chamber deep within the palace, where senior officials gather to debate the intricate rules governing hats, their colors, materials, and decorations, a visual language all their own. This room hums with the low murmur of voices weighing tradition against practicality, a delicate balance that shaped Tang court life. An elder statesman unfurls a silk scroll detailing the exact feather types allowed for each rank, explaining how the rarest feathers came from distant lands along the Silk Road, a symbol of both prestige and Tang China's vast reach. You learn about the fascinating intersection between imperial decree and local customs, how officials from border regions sometimes adapted their hats with indigenous motifs, blending official rules with personal identity. A younger official argues for modernization, proposing simpler hats to reduce costs and avoid confusing visitors unfamiliar with the elaborate hierarchy. His proposal sparks lively discussion, revealing underlying tensions between progress and tradition. Historians still debate how much these internal disputes influenced the evolution of official dress codes over time. You catch a glimpse of a hand-painted chart mapping the gradual changes in hat styles across decades, a visual history of shifting power and aesthetic tastes. One particularly passionate participant recites poetry praising the hat as the crown of one's virtue, underscoring the deep symbolic weight officials placed on their headwear. You notice subtle gestures, nods, raised eyebrows, that suggest the hat was more than mere ornament. It was a badge of honor and a tool of political signaling. As the meeting adjourns, you feel the room's charged atmosphere linger, a reminder that even the smallest details in dress could stir great debate and influence. Walking away, you carry a newfound respect for the hats, not just as fashion, but as living symbols woven into the fabric of governance. You step into a dimly lit chamber filled with the hushed chatter of officials discussing the subtler side of hats, the etiquette and unspoken rules for how, and when, to wear them. In Tang China, a hat wasn't just placed on your head, It was worn like a language, conveying respect, mood, and social nuance. Your guide, a courteous courtier named Zhang, explains how hats were adjusted for different settings, worn straight and proud during formal ceremonies, slightly askew during informal gatherings, or removed entirely when showing humility or respect indoors. You observe a demonstration where officials practice the hat bow, a delicate tilt and slight lowering of the head paired with careful repositioning of the cap's tassel, a silent greeting and sign of deference rolled into one graceful motion. Zhang reveals that breaking these subtle rules could cause unintended offense, sometimes escalating tensions during already delicate negotiations. Imagine, one wrong tilt and a lifetime's reputation might wobble, he jokes. You're intrigued by an old proverb about the hat's shadow, a metaphor for the unseen social signals projected by wearing a hat properly. Historians still debate whether these gestures formed an early code of non-verbal diplomacy. You learn that officials often trained extensively in hat etiquette, a skill as important as public speaking or writing. Zhang shares a quirky anecdote about a notoriously clumsy official who repeatedly botched his hat bows, earning the affectionate nickname "Wobbly Cap" among peers, a gentle reminder that even tradition has room for humor. As the day ends, you marvel at the complexity hidden beneath the seemingly simple act of wearing a hat, where every tilt and tassel carries meaning. Walking through the quiet palace halls, you feel the invisible dance of cloth and protocol swirl around you, a gentle rhythm of power, respect, and human foibles. You find yourself in the twilight hours of a quiet evening, walking the palace corridors where memories linger and hats once graced countless heads with solemn dignity. Tonight's focus is the legacy of Tang hats, their enduring influence on later Chinese dynasties and beyond. You observe how subsequent dynasties, like the Song and Ming, adapted Tang hat styles, blending old traditions with new fashions. The curved wings and feather tassels evolved, yet the symbolism of rank and duty persisted. A curator shows you delicate paintings depicting officials in hats reminiscent of the Tang era, suggesting a reverence for the past even as styles changed. You notice hints of regional influences creeping in, reflecting China's growing diversity. Historians still debate how much the Tang model shaped other East Asian cultures, like Korea and Japan, whose court hats share intriguing similarities and differences. You learn that the Tang's emphasis on official hats as markers of identity inspired similar systems abroad, a testament to the dynasty's cultural reach. In a quiet moment, you hold a replica Tang hat, feeling the weight of history woven into the silk and feathers, a tangible connection to lives once lived, decisions made, and traditions forged. You reflect on how something as simple as a hat became a vessel for power, ceremony, and personal expression, a small but potent piece of the vast Tang tapestry. Outside, the palace gardens rest under a blanket of stars, whispering stories of hats worn, battles won in court, and the quiet dignity of public service. As you step into the cool night air, you carry with you the echoes of silk rustling and feathers brushing, a final, gentle reminder of the Tang official's world. The morning light filters softly through the palace windows as you prepare to say farewell to the world of Tang hats. But before you go, there's one last layer to uncover: the personal stories and legends tied to these hats, tales whispered through generations, blending fact and fancy. You hear of the legendary official who famously lost his hat during an imperial procession, only to have the emperor laugh and declare it a good omen for humility. This small incident became a beloved story, reminding officials that even the most prestigious could stumble. Another tale tells of a clever official who used a secret compartment in his hat to smuggle important documents, a hat doubling as a covert messenger. While historians debate the veracity of such stories, they highlight the creativity sparked by the hat's symbolic power. You also discover folk songs praising the hat as a symbol of honor, duty, and the weight of public trust. These songs traveled beyond the palace walls, embedding themselves in the popular imagination. As you reflect on these stories, you realize the hat was never just a piece of clothing. It was a character in the drama of Tang politics, society, and culture. You take a final look at the empty hat rack, imagining the myriad heads that once wore these symbols of responsibility and status, each with their own hopes, fears, and dreams. So, as you gently close this chapter, remember, hats may be small, but their stories are vast, woven into the fabric of history like the finest silk. Now, as you settle down, carry these whispers with you, letting the rustle of silk and the soft tap of tassels lull you toward peaceful rest.